we are going to discuss the macromolecules of life. So, first, what is a macromolecule? It is a molecule containing a very large number of atoms, such as a protein, nucleic acid, or synthetic polymer. So molecules are obviously a collection of atoms together, and macromolecules are just a collection of molecules together. Looking at the definition of polymer, it is a substance that has a molecular structure consisting chiefly or entirely of a large number of similar units bonded together. For example, many synthetic organic materials use as plastic and resins. Okay, so it sounds similar to a macromolecule, but basically the difference is that a polymer is a bunch of repeating units of molecules. So polymers can be macromolecules, but the key distinction is that macromolecules, they don't have to be repeating units of molecules together. Polymers do have to be repeating units over and over and over again. So both can be macromolecules, but polymers are the only ones that have to have the same units happening again and again. Okay, there are 4 different kinds of macromolecules. So again, these macromolecules make up life, and they are all essential to life. And those things are carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, and nucleic acids. Okay, we can see with some gifs on the right side. When we think of carbohydrates, we think of things like wheat, pastas. When we think of lipids, that is going to be fats, so fats, oils, butter. Proteins, we usually think about meat, eggs, and then nucleic acids, that is going to be DNA and RNA. Okay? Now let's get into some specifics of what each of those are. So first, the carbohydrate. So it is any of a large group of organic compounds occurring in foods and living tissues, including sugars, starch, and cellulose. They contain hydrogen and oxygen in the same ratio as water, 2:1, and typically can be broken down to release energy in the animal body. So essentially, carbohydrates, they are food. They're the main thing that is broken down to release energy. As we can see in the picture below, glucose. So we talked about glucose with photosynthesis and cellular respiration. That is a sugar or a carbohydrate. And again, that is broken to release energy. Living things need energy to be able to do other living things to survive. So that's why carbohydrates are super important. A unit of a carbohydrate is known as a monosaccharide, which is how I think of it, like one hexagon or pentagon, as we can see there. Then you have things like disaccharides. Di means 2, where mono means 1. That's just more than one monosaccharide together. And then a polysaccharide, poly means any, that just means anything more than 2 saccharides together. So again, unit of carbohydrate is a monosaccharide. All right, lipids, okay? A lipid is any of a class of organic compounds that are fatty acids or their derivatives and are insoluble in water, but soluble in organic solvents. They include many natural oils, waxes, and steroids. Okay, looking at the picture in the top right, that is known as a phospholipid. Those are the things that make up the cell membrane, so already that's a huge part about how lipids are important. If we look at the picture in the top left, the main function of lipids is, or really fats, is to store energy. So any extra carbohydrates that are made or basically intaken into the body or living organism, those are going to be stored, and then that becomes fat. And that's essentially what lipids are for, is for storing energy in those fat cells. Some kinds of hormones are lipids. A lot of hormones are proteins, but some hormones are lipids. And then another important part about them and fats is that they insulate the body and organs from cold. So there's a whole survival mechanism from that. For example, if you go without food for a long time, your body starts burning or getting that energy from those fat cells that were stored, and you start burning up. A unit of lipids is known as a triglyceride, which you can see that molecular structure in that bottom left picture. And an example, again, would be like honey, fats, butter, oils. Those are all examples of lipids. Waxes. All right, proteins, very, very important macromolecule. So a protein is any of a class of nitrogenous organic compounds that consist of large molecules composed of one or more long chains of amino acids and are an essential part of all living organisms, especially of structural components of body tissues such as muscle, hair, collagen, etc., and as enzymes and antibodies. Proteins, long story short, they can do just about almost anything in the body. So they structurally are part of a lot of things, such as muscle, hair, collagen. Enzymes are basically proteins that can make certain reactions happen. So your body is doing tons of reactions all the time, and proteins are involved in a lot of those. And then antibodies, that's a part of your body's defense to attack viruses or basically anything foreign in your body. And then they basically maintain who you are. That's really a whole part of protein. So they have a whole lot of different functions. When we think of proteins, we usually think about, meat, eggs, things like that. But at the molecular level, that is more of what they look like in that bottom right photo. Okay. So a unit of a protein is known as an amino acid. Okay. And molecularly, this is what it looks like. Now, this thing called R at the bottom of that R side chain, what that means is R is essentially just like a variable. So every amino acid or unit of protein has the amino group, the carboxyl group, that one hydrogen on top, and then the R is the part that's going to be different from amino acid to amino acid. Okay? So that R can be one of 20 different kinds of amino acids. So there are 20 different kinds of amino acids. We can know, or we can use DNA and RNA to figure out what those amino acids would be, and that's going to be a whole nother video in the future. But essentially, just to preface a little bit, these two images say the same thing. They're both known as codon charts, and basically we can use these charts to figure out what amino acid is going to be a part of the protein produced. But again, that's for another video. We'll get more into that. Okay, protein structure. So depending on the structure of the protein, it can also determine the function of the protein. Okay, so structure and function correlate with one another very much so. So a simple primary structure of a protein would just be a chain of amino acids. So just amino acid, amino acid, amino acid, all in just kind of a linear fashion. Then a secondary protein structure, so more complex than a primary, is when those chain of amino acids start to take the structure of either an alpha helix or a pleated sheet. And sometimes basically these can go from alpha helix, then pleated sheet, and alpha helix, pleated sheet. So it's not just one or the other. It can be a mix of the two, like going back and forth, if you have a really big, long protein. But essentially, it's just a secondary protein structure is more complex than a primary. A tertiary protein structure is a bunch of secondary protein structures all mixed around and conformed and twisted around each other. That's how I like to think about a tertiary structure. And then a quaternary structure is a bunch of tertiary structures bundled and conformed around each other and attached. So quaternary is going to be usually the largest, while primary is not going to be as long as the most simple. We can see the gifts on the left too. You can see some other kind of configurations there. But again, the structure of the protein determines what it is able to do in addition to what specific amino acids make it up. All right, the last kind of macromolecule that's going to be discussed today is nucleic acids. So nucleic acid is a complex organic substance in living things, especially DNA or RNA, whose molecules consist of many nucleotides linked in a long chain together. Okay, so nucleic acids, that's DNA and RNA. That's what nucleic acids are. Obviously, everything that makes you who you are comes originally from nucleic acids, and then nucleic acids are used to make proteins, and then the proteins basically do whatever the DNA, the instructions are in the DNA. Okay, so that's how proteins and DNA are very, very important. That's why proteins are able to do so many different things, because in the DNA, everything is encoded in DNA to make a living thing a living thing. Unit of nucleic acid is called a nucleotide. If we look at the top left photo, it's composed of a phosphate group, a pentose sugar, and a nitrogenous base. And for that image, they have the nitrogenous base added. Going to be discussed more in another video, but essentially the difference between DNA and RNA is DNA is double-stranded while RNA is single-stranded. In both DNA and RNA, there are 4 different kinds of nitrogenous bases that can be added to that phosphate and pentose sugar. Essentially, in DNA, that can be thymine as its 4th nitrogenous base, while in RNA it is known as uracil as its 4th nitrogenous base. And those are some of the main differences between DNA and RNA. In summation, 4 again different kinds of macromolecules. There's carbohydrates, its subunit is monosaccharide. Lipids, subunit is a triglyceride. Proteins, subunit is amino acid. And nucleic acid, subunit is a nucleotide. Some of the things discussed in this video today will be elaborated more on in future videos and lessons. Thank you for watching. Please share and subscribe. And remember to spread